Okay, so today's notes is about supply and demand. Make sure you're taking Cornell style notes and that you write a summary at the end. We do have one short video for this notes. It's just a little introduction to supply and demand, and I will post the link for that on Google Classroom. So, supply and demand. This is a basic supply and demand graph. Okay, so the red line, or we will also refer to it often as a curve, means the same thing, is supply, while the blue curve is demand. Okay, our y-axis is going to be price, and our x-axis is going to be quantity. I do want you to copy down this graph into your notes. Make sure to label the parts. This is supply, that's demand, because they're not always going to be colored. They'll be the same color sometimes. You need to know which is which. We can identify the supply curve because the supply curve is always upward sloping, or also referred to as the supply curve is ascending. We know it's the demand curve, the blue one, because it's downward sloping or descending. Here are our definitions. So, supply is the amount of good and services that producers are willing to sell at all prices. And it's referring to the entire supply curve, the whole line. Important thing with supply is that the seller has to both be willing to sell it and able to sell it. You have to have both in order to have supply. Quantity supplied is the amount of good or service that producers are willing to sell at specific prices, which is what each plot point is on the curve. So each plot point is the quantity supplied. So at $4 a piece, they're willing to supply 4 products. At $2 a piece, 2 products. $8 a piece, 8 products on this particular curve. What is the law of supply? The law of supply states that as price increases, quantity supplied also increases. They're always going to move in the same direction of each other. So if price were decreasing, the law of supply tells us that the quantity supplied will also decrease. What can cause a change in the quantity supplied? Two things. Production decisions by producers, so the people making the product, and then also market entries and exits. So that's referring to new products entering the market, which is going to eventually replace the older products. So, scenario, a new iPhone 11 is announced. What's going to happen to the supply of iPhone X? Make a prediction. So, because of the new product entering the market, the iPhone 11, more than likely the producers would start to produce less of the iPhone X. The supply would decrease. They're still going to sell it because there's still people going to be willing to buy it, but they're going to not make as much because they want to sell more iPhone 11s. Demand is the amount of a good or service that consumers are willing to buy at all prices. So again, it's referring to the entire demand curve. The only way you can have demand is the people must be willing and able to buy the product. So you have to want to buy it and you have to have the money to buy it. Quantity demanded is the amount of a good or service that consumers are willing to buy at a specific price. So again, it's referring to each plot point on the demand curve. So a person might be willing to buy one, or one person's going to be willing to buy the product at $9. Five people might be willing to buy five of the product if it's $5. Okay, so 5 apples for $5. Okay, or you might only be willing to buy one apple for $9. Things like that. The law of demand states that as price increases, the quantity demanded decreases. So they have an inverse relationship. They're going to move in opposite directions of each other. As price increases, quantity demanded decreases. Similarly, if the price were to decrease, then the law of demand tells us that the quantity demanded would increase. What can cause a change in quantity demanded? There's the law of diminishing marginal utility, which basically means, because utility means satisfaction, that over time, the more we use something or the more we have of something, the less satisfied we're going to become from it. So I like to think of leftovers. Let's say you're eating your favorite meal for dinner and you have 5 days worth of leftovers. So you eat that same thing for dinner each and every day for 5 days. By the time you get to the fifth day, you're probably not going to be as satisfied for it, or you might even be sick of it, even though it's your favorite meal. So we lose satisfaction over time. Then there's the income effect. As consumers are making more money, they're going to have a higher demand. If they're making less money, their demand might decrease. Same thing if you have more or less disposable income. So, disposable income are things you can kind of spend on that aren't bills or things necessary to survive. Then we have the substitution effect. There are substitute products out there. So, let's say you prefer Coca-Cola, but a restaurant doesn't have it. A substitute product would be Pepsi, or even some other soda like orange soda, any sort of soda. Another substitution could be hot dogs or hamburgers. Both are common things that you have at a cookout or a barbecue. Um, and you might choose one over the other because they're still relatively similar. So, think about this scenario. As income is increasing, what's going to happen to the demand for, and this is an older example, I need to update it. Let's say AirPods instead of iPods. So, what would happen to the demand for AirPods? Which direction is it going to shift? Okay, so if demand is increasing, then our curve is going to shift to the right. If demand was decreasing, then the curve would shift to the left. So, with this scenario, if people are making more money, they would be more likely to be able to afford the AirPods. So, their demand would go up, it's increasing, which is a shift to the right. So, a change in price can lead to movement along the demand and supply curve, so up or down, just along the curve. It's not going to cause a shift to the left or to the right. These are all things that can lead to changes in the demand or supply curve. So, on the left, we have our demand. So things that can change the demand curve and shift it to the left or right would be consumer income, the number of consumers, so population, consumer tastes and preferences, and price of substitute or complementary goods. So a complementary good is something that you use together. Okay. So if you have hot dogs, a complementary good would be hot dog buns, ketchup, mustard, relish, things like that. Or if you have soda, maybe you need cups, uh, milk with cookies, that kind of thing. Complementary to each other. What can lead to a shift in the supply curve, shifting it to the left or to the right? is cost of input, so the resources we're using to make other things. The number of producers, so the number of people selling or making the product. Conditions due to crises, so that could be weather events, earthquakes, hurricanes, tornadoes, deep freezes, floods, all kinds of stuff. New technology, so if we have new technology introduced to the market that makes it easier or more effective to produce something, that can cause an increase in supply. Producer expectations, if they're expecting something to change in the market, it might cause them to increase or decrease their supply. And then government policies. So, government policies that can affect supply would be like tariffs, which are taxes on imports or exports. Also, subsidies and quotas would be government policies as well that can cause a shift in the supply. So supply and demand curves only shift to the left and to the right. They do not shift up or down. So remember, this is important. An increase in one of them is a shift to the right, and a decrease in one of them is a shift to the left. And this is a graph just kind of showing how that shift would happen. So we have our original demand curve right here. If demand is increasing, which is what the graph is telling us, then we would shift the curve to the right and draw a new curve. Same thing with our supply curve, which is the green one. That's our original supply. Supply is increasing, so we got to shift the curve over to the right. Now, what this also does is it gives us a new price. Okay, it gives us a new price, a new quantity. So in this case, if you look at the original price and original quantity, and the center where they intersect, that's called equilibrium. We have a new one because of the shift. Okay, so with the new shift, you would draw out these lines that go across, and you could see then that your price, your equilibrium price, decreased as well, and your quantity increased. So price decreased, quantity increased because our demand and supply curves shift. So we had an exit ticket in class. With these exit tickets, students answered each of these scenarios on an index card. I do want you to do that and turn it in to me because I am giving a grade for that. So scenario number 1, Rihanna says Snapchat sucks. What's going to shift in the Snapchat market? I want you to tell me, is it going to be demand or supply that's going to shift? And is it going to be an increase or a decrease? Scenario 2, the government passes gun control laws. What shifts in the gun markets? Is it going to be a shift in demand or supply? And is it an increase or a decrease? Scenario 3, In-N-Out increases the prices of their burgers. What shifts in the burger market? Is it demand or supply? And is it increase or a decrease? And the final scenario, number 4, a shooting happens. Think like a mass shooting. What's going to shift in the gun market? Is it going to be supply or demand? Or could it possibly be both? And is it going to be an increase or a decrease in the gun market?